Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining me. My name is Cheryl Babin, and I'm here from the Calgary Regional Consortium with our new curriculum, 30-minute bite-sized boosts, 6 recorded lunchtime sessions for K-6 teachers to talk about new curriculum implementation. So today, before we get started, I would just like to spend a little moment to acknowledge that we are on an important and sacred place within Treaty 7 and the traditional territories of the Niitsitapi from the Blackfoot Confederacy, including the Siksika, the Piikani, the Kainai, and the Yahari Nakota of the Chiniki, Bearspaw, and Wesley Nations, and the Dene of the Tsuut'ina Nation. Southern Alberta is also home to Métis Nation of Alberta, Region 3. So important that we not only acknowledge that land that we are on, but we are leaders in reconciliation, and that we do whatever we can to respond to the calls to action within our schools, within our own lives, and as leaders in the community. Today's first principles of learning that I would like to lean into is really about embracing Indigenous ways of knowing and understanding that learning involves patience and time. And I think it's so often we feel a tension as teachers, attention to try to cover curriculum, to move quickly through the outcomes and the learnings, because we have this responsibility in terms of our roles as teachers to get through or to cover curriculum that's outlined and designated to us in our grade level. And this tension exists for us when we realize that some of our students may not be at a place where they can tackle the curriculum that quickly, or perhaps we have students that have already passed certain outcomes. And then as we know, the gap widens, and we see such diversity and a wide range of needs of learners in our classes. And so what I'd really like to lean into today is the acknowledgement that learning involves patience and time, and we need to be patient with ourselves, patient with our students, and we need to be responsive in how we design learning to really accommodate for the differences in time that students require for learning in different ways. And so this is an important part of what we're going to talk about today. So as always, I've created a bit.ly link to the slides and a QR code if that will help you to access this slide deck easily. The link to the slides is bit.ly /takeabite6, and the QR code is there for you. So I will just post that into the chat as well, and you'll be able to access that as if you want to follow along. And you'll want to have that this time for sure, because I've included some links to different planning templates that we will be using in the course of our session today. So I'll just give you a second to grab a copy of the Take a Bite 6. Let's see, bit.ly Take a Bite 6. There we go. It's in the chat for you. I hope that will work okay. I'm just going to move this out of the way. Thank you. Okay, here we go. So today we're really going to explore a planning strategy that responds to students' ongoing needs. And we started to think about this a little bit last week when we were looking at data. And our goal and our intention is really to flexibly plan both long range and unit designs. But we have to start small, and we want to really think about what it is that's driving our planning. So what's the driver? Michael Fullan talks about accessing and leveraging the right drivers for system effectiveness and continuity. But when we think about our own practice as classroom teachers, we really have to think about which drivers we want to engage. And if our goal is to just cover curriculum and get through it as quickly as possible, or in order to complete it through the whole course of the year, we want to think about the driver is then spreading it out and basically accomplishing that task, which of course is our goal, and we are trying to do our best to meet the needs of students in that way. But we also need to respond to what the students are telling us and what they need in terms of patience and time. So today, the driver that we're really focusing on is that responsiveness, and how can we plan according to the student's needs in that really effective, obvious way. I'm just going to draw back on some of the conversation that we had last week. We looked at what does the evidence reveal? And we talked about triangulation and how students are showing us different aspects of their learning. Sometimes they look at possible outcomes of some people are ready to move on. Sometimes there's misconceptions. Some people just need more time to practice skill building. And so we have to differentiate and manage our next steps as we go through. We sometimes have to circle back, and sometimes we're ready to consider how our resources can help support that learning. And there's lots of ways that we can get through that in that differentiated space. But when we have long-range plans and multiple subjects to consider and the needs of students, we really want to create a planning approach that's actually useful for your particular group of students at the time. So we thought a lot about this. So how can we create a responsive planning template that achieves these things? We thought about what we've learned around having a set criteria for our target. We want something that can be flexible and changeable and inclusive of all students. Number two is we really want this to be useful. We don't want to just create another compliance document, a planner that needs to be submitted to administrators on September 30th, only to sit unused for the rest of the year. We thought about the difference between a long-range plan, a responsive planner, a scope and sequence, or even like a year at a glance. And each of those different titles does have its role, but I really want to differentiate what a responsive planner is doing by looking at these criteria. We want this to be easy for teachers, not too time-consuming, but something that can be jot noted and everything in one place. We also really want the planning to be driven by assessment for learning. So how do we respond to what we are seeing? How do we respond to the data? Once we've collected it, we need to use it, we need to read it, we need to understand it, and then design our next steps. So in doing so, we also want to be able to layer in or add the competencies or the ability for students not just to memorize facts and reproduce skills, but to know when and why and what is happening that's important in that context. So we want them to be able to transfer that learning in a meaningful way to an authentic context beyond what the cusps will say in the curriculum. We also thought about the necessity of teachers to be able to work in a shareable, editable, and realistic platform where we're not isolated into our own silos, but rather we can lean on each other, co-plan, and see how we can make connections along the way. So it's quite a tall order of criteria, but we're trying, and I hope that you will find that we were able to meet some of these in a way that will work for you. As we think about dipping into this particular responsive planner, I would invite you to engage in a thinking activity that we sometimes use. Now, I've clipped this from a document that I've shared with the end. So this is like your how-to video if you're catching up on the recording. But we often use a metaphor of being a seed, a sprout, or a tree. And if we think about stepping into something new with that mind frame, it allows us to be forgiving and to be compassionate with ourselves, that if something feels overwhelming, that we just want to take a smaller bite to start with. And so if you designate yourself and maybe self-identify as a seed in this work, then go into the template from a place of curiosity. Notice how the planning documents encourage you to consider all learners. How might you organize and prioritize outcomes that students need to develop understandings? So just focus in on that. Look at it curiously and say, how can I use parts of this in my own practice? And what might I learn from this? If you're feeling a little bit more confident with the ways in which this planner lays out the responsiveness, you might consider yourself a sprout, not a sprite, a sprout. In which case we would encourage you to look for change along the way. There's intentionally embedded opportunities for a reflection or a shift or a change, which is actually making it responsive. So how might this planner encourage a response to assessment evidence that's revealed by students? So if you're a Sprout, think about change as your driver or your lever. And if you're a tree, then you really are looking for ways to advance learning for transfer and conceptual understanding. So we would encourage you to think about how do the cusps and the learning outcomes, how are students demonstrating engagement in a task design, and how are you moving them into a transdisciplinary or a way that you can cluster outcomes from multiple subjects to create authentic experiences? And how do you design that with rich formative assessment opportunities along the way? With all of these things in mind, you can see that there's an entry point for everyone, and we hope that you'll find that a comfortable place to begin. All right, so on this slide here, I'm going to walk you through a couple of pieces. There are two different examples here of a place to start. We're going to start by taking a small bite out of a sample of a responsive planner. You'll have a link to it here, and there's just a little image that gives you a snapshot. And then we'll go into a document where you can make your own copy, and you'll be encouraged to modify and make it your own. All right, so let's start, and I'm going to move out of this slide deck, so you'll want to watch me on your Zoom screen if possible. And this particular document is called Take a Small Bite Out of Responsive Planning. And I'm going to walk you through this step by step, and so I hope you will interrupt me by turning on your mic or note a comment in the chat for me if you like, okay? And so the two columns on the right-hand side, this is a Google Sheet, and there's lots of different ways if you're an Excel user. Typically, I've found that as a teacher, I didn't have a real need to work with Google Sheets or Microsoft Excel, but I have found it to be really useful in terms of having everything in one place. So bear with me, and hopefully you'll find that it's a way that can work for you as a learner. So looking at columns A and B, you'll see that it's a responsive planner. The very first thing that we want you to notice is that in this yellow bar here, we always want to start by thinking about all of our learners. What do you know about your students that will help to inform your work? And across the top of this column here, you will see that we have embedded some questions about strategies, how you might include all of your learners. We've actually put in a couple of hyperlinks in there as well. If you're a seed, leave those for a little bit later and just really focus on what you know about students. As we move across the planner here, and I've just grabbed a small bite, but you will see that we have questions that are offered each month as you go through, and you can see that as the year goes by, we offer different prompts and ways that you can think about that, okay? And so I'm just clicking back in here. Then as we move further down, we've outlined there's a spot for you to keep track of months and days, and also the school events and the key dates. We know that the events that take place in schools need to be embedded into your planning, as it's important that we all consider all of those possibilities and all of the ways in which your class time is impacted. Then we go down and we think about a key concept, or what's happening for all learners. What concepts are embedded into all of the organizing ideas and guiding questions. And so here's an example of what I was thinking about that. Now, this particular bite-sized example was taken from September. So let's just say it's the last couple of weeks of September. And I was thinking about key concepts, and I thought, okay, you know, a lot of schools take part in Terry Fox events. And it's also the beginning of the year. So maybe you're really working, even if you're kindergarten or grade 6, you're really thinking about building community in your class. You're getting to know students and their identity, and you want to have that sense of belonging. You may also be working on infusing some learning about Terry Fox and perhaps making a connection if you choose these concepts of identity, community, and belonging. How might Terry Fox help contribute to a sense of belonging and community? And so I took those ideas, just concept ideas that kind of encompass some of the things that would be happening in class, and created a guiding question in this blue section here that would kind of capture the concepts there. How can learning about our place help us feel a sense of belonging? So imagine that question being the driver for your kindergarten, grade 1, or even in grade 6. So if we're looking at a sense of place to help us create a sense of belonging, how does government play into that when you're thinking about understanding your local government? Or maybe you're thinking about how do we, if you're in grade 5 and you're thinking about learning the regions of Canada or the sense of identity. So I think that those concepts could really transcend lots of different grades. Then we started to think about, okay, how do we unpack these concepts a little bit? And every good learning experience is actually an opportunity to gather and collate some assessment evidence. So when thinking about learning experiences and assessments, kind of color-coded them here. If there was an opportunity for me to learn about students through conversation, I colored it yellow. If it was a chance for me to observe students doing something, I colored it green. And if it was an experience that would ask them to create a product or a performance, it's coded blue. Okay, and so you can see here that in this section here about key assessments, it's just a quick little, not even full sentences, but a chance to say, okay, here's a picture book. It's called A Bad Case of the Stripes. Choose to tell about a time you tried to be like someone else. Draw about a time you tried to be like someone else. So it's a picture book, but it's also an experience that students would engage in to help us unpack that overarching question. Another idea might be a conversation about what does it feel like or look like or sound like to belong. And then small groups to follow up on skill building, writing sentences about the ideas that they came, speaking in full sentences and practicing to connect examples to the books. Then you could also, there's a couple of other ideas here. Add in a Stony book or discuss with a community member what that means from an Indigenous perspective. Here's another one. Suki's Kimono is another picture book. I tried to link these in with Read Aloud so that if you liked these, you could use them. But maybe you create a class continuum as a visual and students have to agree or disagree about a position. And then they have to come up with an idea that can help them articulate or provide evidence for their opinion. Maybe they have to tell a story about the land and partners and think about listening to that experience and how that might be a story that you can talk about the different components. And so you see here that I've tried to include a couple of different types of learning experiences that would also reveal some assessment evidence. Then if you keep working down in terms of our planner, you will see that there's an opportunity to think about the competency focus. Now, the competencies are really important aspects of our work that we still want to fit in because it makes meaning and it helps us do something with the learning. So in these ways, I was really focusing on communication, well-being in terms of that sense of belonging and personal growth as well. So you could choose one, you could choose two. I wouldn't select them all, even though all of them could probably fit into any of those weeks that you do. You'll notice that there's not a space for every single lesson or part of a lesson in this responsive planner. It's just key things that could help kind of drive the week a little bit. And then you can follow up in different ways based on what's happening. After that, you'll see that there is this opportunity here for learning, for grabbing learning outcomes. And I'm going to flip back to the responsive planning template because in this version of it, which you have a link to, we have wanted to make this really easy for you. So we made a tab that was all about the learning outcomes. And so we've included, cut and pasted for you, the ELAL, math and physical education and wellness outcomes for kindergartens through grade 6. And so if you scroll down, you'll see the subjects. Here's ELL, ELAL, here's math, and here's physical education and wellness. And if you scroll to the side, you can see kindergarten through grade 6. So as you are working on these outcomes on the small bite, you'll see that I went into those learning outcomes and I copied and pasted a couple of outcomes quickly from that other tab and dropped it right in so that I could see those main outcomes that I'm working on this week. Finally, the next section, it talks about notes and reflections, and it gives you some prompting questions. Which assessments were successful in revealing evidence that was useful to you? Which areas of content require more support or revision for students? How will you group and regroup students to consider their strengths and stretches? And so if you think about how all of that works, it's just a chance like, oh, I need more practice sharing ideas orally. Here's a couple of things I want to get them to do next week. And so you would take these reflections and then you would think about coming back up to the top, moving over to your next week, and dropping some of those ideas in. Every 2 weeks, we have a yellow bar across this the planner again. And it's a chance for you to just pause and reflect and say, okay, what revisions are necessary? Which outcomes might we need to revisit? How do we extend this? Or what happened from the student's perspective that we can really weave in? Can you add to student questions, or is there something perhaps that you wanted to add in that could make the learning go deeper, and how it can help pull into further pieces? So this is just a little bite-sized example of what you can do in this responsive planning document as a whole group. And you can freeze and sort of capture different parts of the document so that you can see how it can respond throughout the year. Now, this is not intended to be something that you complete all in one sitting, but rather a place where you can keep going back, and then you can see how you can align it with your outcomes through this in this way. And so I'm just going to pause for a second and see if our guests that are here with me in person would have any questions or wonderings about the responsive planner so far. Please make sure that you note in the speaker notes underneath the slides on this deck that there are links as well as on the slides, if that helps you to find access to those particular documents. So the bite-sized one, which is just an example, and then a copy of your own responsive planner. I really want to encourage you to make your own copy of this. And in that case, you can modify it to meet your needs. If you want to add a section, or if there's something that you really need, some people aren't comfortable yet putting multiple subjects of outcomes in one place. So maybe you just want to start by making it just for ELAL, or maybe it's just for math, and you can think about responding through the planning that way. When you're ready for it, you can add multiple subjects in to try and help you think about ways in which you can unpack the content in a transdisciplinary way. So remember that this is meant to be a place where you can create your own copy, and that you can use the tabs at the bottom with multiple sheets and multiple parts. And that's really important for you to notice. So what makes a planner really responsive? Well, you'll remember the criteria that we set out to look at the beginning of the year. And I think that another tip is to avoid the laminator. It's meant to change. It's meant to respond and reflect. So don't laminate your printed version if you want to, but it's meant to keep changing with the times. So I hope you will give that a try and let us know how it's going for you. If you feel like you are ready for even more, we do have a responsive unit planner that is possible. If you want to have a version of the responsive planner that includes a unit planner, you can check it out here. And please remember to reach out with any questions that you might have at any time. We're here for you, and we want to learn your feedback. We've had some people that absolutely love it, and some people that are feeling like it's not quite the way that they see their planning falling through, or we're working out, actually not falling through. But regardless of where you are, we hope that it will inspire some thinking about how you can be responsive in your planning and how you can really meet the needs of students in your care. So as always, wondering what questions you have about assessment, new curriculum, and responsive planning, reach out at any time. Our team is here to help. And thank you for joining me for the last of our 6-part series in the 30-minute bite-sized boosts. I look forward to meeting with you in person sometime soon. Take good care, everyone.